Welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report. I'm Kevin Mannix, an attorney from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight into what happens in and around our state, especially in regard to state government. Our guest today is a gentleman who's been very heavily involved in public safety issues for the state of Oregon, Major Lee Erickson from the Oregon State Police. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Kevin.
What we try to do in this show is give the viewers some insight into not just organizations and activities, but sometimes the personality of people who are involved or the background of people who are involved. So I always try to ask a few background questions. And people seeing you for the first time on TV would say, okay, so he's Major Lee Erickson with the Oregon State Police. Well, where did Major Erickson come from? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was raised in North Portland, graduated from high school in Benson, and then I went to Portland State, back when it was Portland State College, and then I graduated from Southern Oregon. After that, I came on the state police. It was actually one of our first cadets. The state police started a cadet program in 1970, which is an opportunity for college students and other students to come on and work during the summers for the state police. And after that, I started working patrol in Medford and was a detective in the South Coast, working major crime in Coos Curry in western Douglas County. And in the mid-'80s, moved up to Salem and have been a variety of things here in Salem, from detective sergeant. Had the opportunity to start the first automated fingerprint identification system when we started the APHIS program here, and a variety of other jobs. And now I'm director of the strategic emphasis for the Department of State Police, the Office of Strategic Direction and Performance, which...
I'm going to stop you right there. I want to rewind a little on you here and get a little more fleshing out here. Now, you're a major now, but when I first met you, I recall you were a captain.
Right.
So when were you promoted to major?
I was promoted to major a little over 3 years ago.
So now you're getting into those higher and higher executive ranks.
Yeah.
Going back to college, since you became a cadet, I take it that public safety or police was something you were interested in from the get-go?
Yes, it was. I was looking at two different things. One is to look at professional career in the Navy, or to look at professional law enforcement. And at the time, Portland State had just started its law enforcement curriculum under former Sheriff Don Clark, and so I started there with that program at Portland State, and then Southern Oregon was the first to have a full curriculum in law enforcement and criminology, and so that's why I transferred down to Southern Oregon and graduated down there. Now,
when you first joined the Oregon State Police, we had a different situation going in terms of funding, where some of the highway funds were available for policing the highways, and the state police benefited from it. What was it like at that time when you had a reasonably well-staffed police force in terms of your law enforcement capability?
Quite a bit different than it is today. In the early 70s, the Department of State Police and the legislature provided for quite a bit of growth in the addition of officers that were sorely needed in traffic safety, especially in the state police. We were funded under the highway fund at the time, which under Oregon's Constitution allowed for some of those registration fees and gas taxes to partially pay for the safety on the state highways. In the late 70s, those funds under a change in the Constitution were withdrawn from general traffic safety, the ability to use those monies for traffic safety. So the state police funding went from, as far as the patrol side of the department, went from the highway fund to the state's general fund, which is
where... And what kind of drop did we see in the number of patrol officers in round figures?
Well, since 1980, we've lost a little over 215 officers. We've had a couple of additions of officers in the last 2 years, but we've been on a decline on the patrol side of the department since 1980.
I should mention that when those changes occurred, the big push was, I'll call them the highway lobby, were interested in pulling parks funding. There was a lot of parks funding that was also taken out of highway funds, but it looked like policing the highways got thrown out with the baby got thrown out with the bathwater. We've not been able to rebuild since that time in the general fund, but my recollection is the explanation at the time was, oh, well, we will take care of the state police through the general fund. That really hasn't happened, has it?
You're correct. There was a fairly strong commitment back then, you're right, we'll take care of you, we'll take care of that funding for you, but that hasn't happened.
Now I've started to get a little far afield because you were telling us a little about yourself and some of the things. Are you now based in Salem?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm at the headquarters office. I work directly out of the superintendent's office.
And I know you're married. You've mentioned your wife. How does she feel about you being in police work?
You know, she has, I think there's two sides to that. She's proud of what I'm doing and what the department's doing in trying to move more forward in getting back in touch with the people, looking at the prevention side and the successes that we're having and changing police work to where it needed to be changed. She's also been fearful of times, you know, when I was working on the road or as a detective and doing search warrants and, you know, those type of things where you're the first one in the door, not knowing what you're going to find at places that are dealing in drugs and those type of places.
That's the side that we need to keep in mind sometimes when we talk about the level of police that are available too, because the question is, do you have backup? Are you going to have to enter into a situation alone, or is there going to be someone to help you out? And that'll be part of our conversation today, because we'll talk about your community, not community policing, which is really a neighborhood policing type approach, but also your community partnerships. Now, shifting again back to this issue about the funding for police, I just wanted to kind of touch on this and we'll be able to move on. But I did have a graph here that I'd like to share with our audience, which talks or shows the percentage of the general fund that's been devoted to the state police budget. And we see a peak here back in about 83, 85, which was shortly after the state police were taken out of the highway funds. And so to some extent the legislature back then did something to maintain the police. But ever since, there's been this reduction in funding as far as a percentage of the general fund goes. And the question for us will be whether or not the legislature will have the gumption to step up and recognize that if we want to have public safety, we also have to pay for law enforcement out on the highways. But you've done some things too to try to maximize the use of your resources in terms of your cooperation with local government, local police. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and to set the, I think I need to set the context in that, and remember that since the early 90s, the state police is a different organization now than we were in 1990. You know, we've gone from basically a 6-division department to about 13 divisions, and we have the part that people normally see, which is the Uniform Patrol Officer, which is still the largest division in the Department of State Police that provide transportation safety services. But we also have our Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Division, which provides fish and wildlife enforcement services with the Department of Fish and Wildlife all around the state. We have our state detectives, we have the State Crime Laboratory Bureau and Identification, and our new divisions within the department are the State Fire Marshal, Emergency Management, the Law Enforcement Data System, the State Medical Examiner, and a variety of other services that we provide, Criminal Justice Services Division, which is the federal grants manager for the state, for the federal monies that we get in.
Now, you know you're getting close to being what we would call a Department of Public Safety.
Right, and we are, for all intents and purposes, we are a Department of Public Safety. We provide direct services to the citizens of Oregon through Uniform Patrol, through our detective services. We provide a huge amount of infrastructure, though, for the state. Other police departments rely on our crime labs, for instance, and that's all funded out of the chart that you had here. 90% of all of our work, for instance, in the crime laboratory and ID labs, our identification labs, is for city and county agencies, and so we provide that infrastructure throughout the department.
And even on the policing side, you're different from organizations such as, say, the California Highway Patrol or the Washington State Patrol, I think they're called, which really are focused on highway patrol type activities and are not as broad-based as your organization.
Right. Our officers that are on uniform patrol, their main emphasis is in a couple areas. One is transportation safety on the state and federal highways, and we've really moved over the last couple of years to really chart that out and make what we do measurable. Because the public wants to know what difference it makes having a trooper out there, and to what extent that we're able to work with our partners to get some safer highways. But the other things that our uniformed patrol officers do, they are general police officers. We deal with crime on the state highways. We deal with crime in state parks. In many cases, we're the backup for local agencies as they back us up sometimes. But small police departments that need a backup, we have an officer available, we'll back them up. And so our officers on patrol are police officers. They're not just highway patrol.
To build on an example then, say you've got a deputy sheriff or a couple of deputy sheriffs who do a drug bust. First of all, the state police may be on the scene there to provide backup to them. Second of all, once the bust has been completed and there's a need for analysis of the evidence, it would be the state police crime lab that does the analysis.
Correct.
And as you move through it, say there's some need for some forensic type evidence, you folks will provide those kinds of services too to evaluate a crime scene?
Yes, we have one of the more progressive crime laboratories in the United States. And working with local agencies and the major crime teams, we provide criminalists that will go in and analyze crime scenes, pick up trace evidence, process blood and body fluids for DNA. We're one of the most progressive DNA labs in the United States. We'll process for fingerprints. We were one of the pioneering states that worked with other states to buy fingerprint computers. Rather than just one state buying it and spending all the money, we said, why can't we partner with our fellow states and share the cost and share the resources? And so we now have one of the most progressive, what we call APHIS systems, to take fingerprints that are left at a crime scene, that we can lift those fingerprints and compare those fingerprints with these large databases. Nowhere else in the world did we put together this partnership that we've done with that. And so we have the ability to process crime scenes like we've never had before.
So when we want to talk about government efficiency, as many people do, I would venture to say that the Oregon State Police are a good example of efficiency, maximizing scientific resources to get results in terms of investigation, but also maximizing cooperation with other police agencies in the state so that you don't have a lot of duplication. You don't have 15 different agencies with their own crime labs.
Right, and that's been one of the main themes of with Superintendent Howland's at the helm, is the issue about to what extent do we work with other agencies to avoid duplication, to say, all right, this is our job, we'll do ours, you do your part of the job. And partnershiping is one of the main themes of this administration, is that we're going to work with other agencies to do that.
The challenge there, I guess, is to make sure that as we do these partnerships, that everything links together well, and that can be done administratively, but then you also have to have the personnel. Maybe it's like these fingers. And part of the problem right now for the state police is you may be trying to partner, but you haven't got all 5 fingers. You don't have the staffing that you need. I'm not asking you to make a comment on that, but when you mentioned 215 less patrol officers, with a much larger population and much larger number of motor vehicles in the state in the last 15 years, we've obviously seen a reverse trend. Population up, patrol officers down. Is there some evaluation going on? Is there some formula being put together to try to analyze how you can fill that gap?
Yes, there is. What we looked at is saying, first of all, the public wants accountability for the resources that we currently have. And so we said, all right, we're going to set out and make sure that our officers are planning their work better, that they're working towards results, that they're not just out here randomly enforcing the law, but enforcing it towards a project or a purpose that they have in mind to reduce crime, to reduce the amount of accidents. And I've got some really good examples of where we're doing that. Because first of all, we felt that we could not go to the public and ask for more resources unless we could stand up and say, we've done our best to maximize the resources that we have and that we're working with our partners. But let's face it, is that even though we're doing the best we can, we still have huge gaps in service areas. You know, there are times when there may be one person working on Interstate 5 from the Washington border to the California border. The public does not understand that. They don't realize the lack of service that's available out there to respond to the needs and also to respond to the calls for service. A good example here in Marion County, of all the calls that we get from the motoring public complaining about reckless drivers and dangerous drivers on the freeway, we're only in position about 10% of the time to respond to the citizens' complaints. That's unacceptable. And so what we're trying to do is to say, all right, what jobs need to be done where there's not enough officers to do there, and what difference would one more trooper make? And we're calling it a community-based resource gap analysis.
Now, when you apply that gap analysis, of course, you're going to need some external factor perhaps to compare it to. Are the construction zones on highways where you have a special contract with the Department of Transportation a good way to show, well, here's what happens when we have more intensive patrols as opposed to when we don't? I'm just curious about that.
Sure.
I know that you do have additional officers in construction areas as a safety feature that's been contracted for by the Department of Transportation. Can you tell me a little about that?
Yeah, since the construction zone started, there's been kind of a mixed blessing. The foremost blessing, though, is that the construction zones are safer now than they were prior to the assignment of the troopers that were there. And we had significant reductions in the number of deaths and the number of driving incidents that were in those zones. The problem is that the number of officers that we need as far as the base to get the officers there has shrunk so much that we can't respond to all of the construction zones that we needed. As an example, in the Portland area, we may have 5 construction zones going at one time. It may have 2 officers working.
All right, so the concept will work, but the resources aren't there to fully implement the concept.
Yeah, that's been the problem, is that, you know, we want to make those construction zones safe for the workers and safe for the motoring public, but we are spread so thin that we can't get to all of them.
Well, in a moment, I want to ask a little more about that in terms
Okay.
of a New York model that we talked about before we started the show. But first, I need to turn to the audience and say that you're with us on the Kevin Mannix Report. I'm Kevin Mannix, your host. If at any time you have any questions or concerns, feel free to write to me at 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301. You can also call me, and I have to look over at the phone number. 391-4799 is the phone number in Salem. Feel free to call that number. It's likely to be on voicemail because that's a campaign telephone number. But you can call and leave a message there, and we'll be glad to hear from you. And we'll return now to our guest for this program, Major Erickson. I brought up just before that non-commercial interruption the idea of the New York model, and can you tell us a little bit about what's coming out of New York State and New York City in terms of a comprehensive approach to policing?
Yeah, there's been quite a few things along the, it's called the theory of fixing broken windows, and I know that Portland Police Department, Woodburn Police Department has been successful in doing it. New York, in fact, is New Mexico State Police is looking at it, and we're looking at it also. And the issue that comes up repeatedly in the theory of fixing broken windows is the issue of order maintenance. And it's been mostly applied in cities where you have large urban areas and you have the graffiti, the open violation of laws, whether it's gang-type activity, graffiti, those type of things that make people feel very unsafe. And then what happens when that erosion of the community takes place, and then what does it take to get the community back? Boston is another good example of where they've applied these type of theories. One of the things that a state police agency, though, has never done until recently is start to look at that and say, all right, well, what are the issues going on in the public areas that the state police have responsibility for? And those are the state highways, the freeways, and our relationship with state parks. What can we do to help make the quality of life on our highways better? And what we're seeing over time is an increase in the aggressive driver. There's a certain percentage of road rage that's out here. And if you talk to most people asking where they had their last near-death experience, it's probably not going to be at home. It's most likely, according to national studies, going to be something that occurred on the highway. Somebody following too close, cutting them off, this general disregard for lawful behavior in public that's occurring on our highways.
Is part of that because the drivers have a sense of anonymity, particularly the perpetrators? Well, they don't really know who I am and they're not going to get me anyway, a sense of that there isn't enough enforcement out there so they can get away with this?
That's what we believe it is that, you know, it's easy to use example of the freeway from Portland to Salem, where we believe that there's been a significant loss in the lawful driving out there. I mean, we see these things, I personally see them when I drive up there to Portland or back, is that without sufficient patrols, there is no deterrent.
So let me pose a vision to you.
Okay.
With all the cellular phones that people have these days, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could say to the public that anytime you're out there on a major highway and in many circumstances secondary roads, that there's a cell number you can call on your cell phone, star SP or whatever, state police, and there will be a trooper within reasonable distance to come to your aid, or better yet, to enforce the law if you see someone doing 95 miles an hour, or weaving in and out, drunk driving, that there will be some capability for citizens to aid the police and to be the eyes and ears of the police as to egregious violations. So that people would feel more safe in terms of some accident happening to them, but also safe in terms of being able to cooperate with police to track down those who don't care about the safety of others.
Right, that's, you know, that is part of our vision, and that's why I said it earlier, is that we've got, right now, those calls that are coming in, we're able to only respond on about 10% of those calls that we're getting now. You know, about a variety of driving.
So one of our goals ought to be, let's get to 95% response, which would take resources.
Correct.
And the question is how, and incrementally you'll probably be able to identify over time how many additional resources you need to reach certain levels of responses. Am I wrong about that, or is that what you would hope to do?
Yes, we can measure, and we do measure now under, you know, what is our presence out there? How often are we out there? We're also looking at how many complaints that we're not able to get to that we need to get to. But the other part, and the third leg of this stool, though, is that what are we out there doing that is preventative work through proper and timely enforcement that creates an environment that's ultimately safer. We don't want to
get the message out.
Right,
Get the message out.
Right, but we have to be there to do that. We have to be present out there in that uniformed officer to do that.
Let me analogize it to the mid-high classroom, 8th grade. When the teacher's there, the 95% of the kids who want to learn, if they've got a teacher who's pretty good and who knows how to maintain discipline, things will go well and discipline will be maintained. The teacher leaves the classroom. There's no teacher there. How much education is going on? Well, you don't have the source of education, but also you don't have the source of discipline. I imagine that the unruly will begin to rule the classroom. My analogy out on the highways, if you don't have the presence of state police, you lose something just from the lack of presence. Then you're saying beyond that, the fact that you are enforcing the law also sends a message that it's not just paper public policy, but that public policy means something in terms of, you called it maintenance of order in the community?
Right. It does. You know, we were looking at the accident statistics here the other day, the collision ones, and a startling fact came to light, is that if you're involved in a motor vehicle collision, you are 100 times more likely to die if that collision is on the freeway versus a city street. And those are the 1996 traffic collision statistics that the Department of Transportation puts together.
So every collision that we can avoid on a highway is a potential life-threatening situation that we can avoid.
Right. Far more people are dying in the collisions on state highways than the murders that occur in this state. And then the injury accidents, you know, a lot of those are preventable.
So now that we've set up a system in Oregon where we're holding violent offenders accountable, and there may be some additional legislation proposed to get after those repeat property criminals, burglars and auto thieves, that's another topic for another day. Part of this equation, besides prevention, working with kids and schooling and rehabilitation, working with offenders, helping to straighten out, but in this whole cosmic scheme of things, we need to be focusing on the state police presence and the state police programs, it sounds like.
Yes, it is.
Now, how do you see that interacting with, say, the sheriff's departments and the city police? You've talked about this integration of programs. Do you have a structure set up to work with them?
We do. This is the state of Oregon needs to be proud of what the sheriffs, the chiefs of police, the district attorney, and the state police, and the attorney general have done under what we have termed is cooperative policing planning, which occurs nowhere else in the United States. And this was driven partially of the vision out of Oregon benchmarks to say how many Oregon communities are really involved in community policing. And as that challenge was placed before the superintendent of state police and the chiefs and sheriffs, what evolved over about an 18-month process was the development of the theory of cooperative policing that says if we cooperatively use all of our resources and come down and put on paper You know, what are some of those responsibilities that the city has, that the sheriff has, that the state police have, that the district attorney have? Let's clearly define those responsibilities, because there's a certain amount of accountability there. So we start to use those resources better. And I can use an example here in Marion County where we're doing that, is that rural crime is a responsibility of the sheriff, and we serve to support the sheriff through forensic laboratories and other things as the sheriff responds to rural crime. We're responsible for state and federal highways, but every time that there are collisions on the state and federal highways that we don't have an officer there, then who responds? Well, the sheriff has to respond. That pulls him away from rural roads, rural traffic safety, and rural crime. And so he starts covering for us. Then that pulls him away from his direct service delivery. So first of all, we're saying, let's put troopers back there to take care of the state responsibility and let the sheriffs go back to their responsibility.
That's a great example then, because as we talk about property tax limitations and the limitation on the ability of local government to maintain their own police forces, which is a challenge for them, the state, instead of giving the local government, say, some money, the state can step in and say, we're going to expand our state police so that they can do their job better, which means we won't be calling on the county or the city to provide the coverage that the state's supposed to provide.
Right. We kind of call it the hydraulic effect, where the state didn't fulfill its responsibility, then local taxpayers, through their city police department or through their county sheriff, have had now to adopt some of those state responsibilities. We're saying, this is a state responsibility. That was one of the main things that came out of cooperative policing, is to say then, all right, if this is a state responsibility, then how well and to what level are we fulfilling our responsibility? And that leads us to the gap analysis that says the state police need to be staffed so that local citizens are then and not again paying for this. I'd like to point out, Kevin, that most people don't know how much it costs to run the state police to them individually. They don't realize that 1.6 cents, a little over 1.5 cents out of their tax dollar, goes to all state police general funded services. For patrol alone, it's 0.7 of a cent out of their tax dollar that provides patrol services all over the state of Oregon.
Yet that can be one of the most visible forms of state government working for its citizens.
Right. It's a very small part. I mean, when you think that just a little over 1.5% of your tax dollar goes for all of these state police services, it's most people, when I ask them, thinks that probably 10 to 15% of their tax bill goes for state police services.
Well, we just have a little time left,
Okay.
about half a minute. Will you be at the next legislative session providing legislators with this information in January of 1999?
Yes, what we're doing that's really exciting to us is that we're going to each one of our communities right now with the sheriff, with the chiefs of police, with community leaders, and saying, at the community level, let's help define what services you need from the state police so that the community can define this and
All
our
right.
partners can define it.
With that message in mind, then, we need to encourage the communities to respond and to work with you on that. And I'd encourage our viewers to be in tune with your local community leaders about this issue and working with the state police so that we can improve public safety throughout Oregon. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Major Erickson.
You bet.
Hello, I'm Senator Marilyn Shannon. Please join me every Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. on CCTV 25, and we'll discuss the political issues.
Hi, this is Senator Gene Derfler. Please join me on CCTV Channel 25, 6:30 Wednesday evenings to discuss the issues. We'd be happy to have you join us.